Hello. Today we are looking at how mainstream economics discusses welfare, or more accurately, how it shows that government interventions in the market reduce welfare. Conversely, there are cases in which the market can fail, that is, situation in which the market does not achieve an optimal outcome, and when interventions in the market improve welfare, and government is allowed to play a role. The basic premise of neoclassical economics is that markets lead to an optimal allocation of goods and services. Any interference with the market makes things worse. The market leads to what is called a Pareto optimal outcome. When a market equilibrium has been achieved, no further beneficial trades are possible. This means that nobody can be made better off without making someone else worse off. There are some exceptions to the optimality of the market outcome, namely when the market fails to do what it is supposed to. For example, there could be a lack of competition in the market, or the market price doesn't actually reflect all the costs and benefits of consumption or production. A simple way to show the impact of government interference in markets, like taxes, price caps, or minimum prices, is to use the concept of consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is defined as the difference between what consumers would be willing to pay, as shown by their demand curve, and what they have to pay, namely the price. Conversely, producer surplus is the difference between the price at which producers would be willing to supply and what they actually get. You can show that any derivation from the market price, like a tax, results in a reduction in the total surplus and a deadweight loss on the market. Let's see what happens when government introduces a unit tax on a product. The price increases by the tax T at any price on the supply curve. In other words, the supply curve shifts upward. A new equilibrium quantity Q1 is established. The price P1 the consumer pays is higher by the tax rate T than the price the supplier gets. There is a redistribution of what was surplus into tax revenue for government. However, because the quantity is lower than the market equilibrium quantity before the tax, there is surplus that is not captured by government and lost altogether. This is the deadweight loss caused by the intervention and shown as the light blue triangle. You can show similar outcomes with price ceilings or minimum prices whenever traded market quantity deviates from the equilibrium. How big the deadweight loss is depends on the slopes of the supply and demand curves. We should expect the demand curve to be horizontal in the long run. In that case, there is no producer surplus to be lost, and consumers shoulder the whole burden of the tax. If the demand curve is vertical, which means that consumers demand a certain quantity no matter what the price, there is no deadweight loss because quantity stays constant. In that case, government captures the whole surplus as tax. No matter whether one can actually trace these curves and measure surplus or not, it's obviously true that a redistribution from the private sector to government makes the private sector worse off. The real question is what government does with the money. If it offers beneficial public goods, the deadweight loss of the surplus can be more than compensated by increased utility. This point is often not discussed, rendering the presentation one-sided and anti-interventionist. Here's another way in which government action is supposed to create problems. It is a well-trodden argument in mainstream economics that redistribution harms efficiency. However, it is not clear what is actually meant by that proposition. If there is an income tax, earners might choose to work less, which is not inefficient, but an optimizing choice. The people who get the money might also choose to work less. Again, perfectly efficient. Overall, there could be less labor offered in the economy and production would shrink, but that's not inefficient per se. The person who is taxed can buy less and the person who gets more can afford more, which was the point of the exercise in the first place. Let's now turn to the cases in which economists allow government action. In non-competitive markets, firms are not price takers, but actually take into account the demand response to price changes. Production is lower and prices higher than in competitive markets. Firms capture consumer surplus and there is a deadweight loss compared to the competitive solution. In the interest of maximizing overall surplus, government intervenes to eradicate uncompetitive behavior by firms. Where monopolies are the most efficient way to produce a service, they are often owned by government. Reversely, governments sometimes give firms a monopoly on purpose, notably when it comes to patents and copyright. The idea is to allow firms to benefit from their research without being copied, but it can also severely hinder innovation and reduce surplus if the protections granted are too extensive. When there are externalities, the market does not achieve an optimal outcome through the price mechanism. The price only captures the private benefits of consumption and the private costs of production. When there are externalities, there are costs or benefits beyond the private ones. For example, if firms can produce without having to pay for the costs of pollution to the people around them, pollution will be too high. Government action introduces the costs of pollution into the firm's decision-making and the prices of the goods it produces. Insurance markets are a good example of where asymmetric information can lead to a misallocation of resources. To prevent problems in the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, the government insurance mandate in Obamacare is a measure to prevent adverse selection by requiring everyone, including the low risks, to take out insurance. Another measure to reduce the problem of adverse selection are the reporting requirements on firms to ensure that they truthfully represent their trading condition. If you exaggerate the value of your real estate to get a loan, you could get the bank to give you money under false pretense, putting the bank at risk and also limiting the amount of loans to other, more healthy enterprises. If people couldn't trust firms' accounting statements, few people would be willing to invest. Goods can be categorized as to whether they are excludable and whether they are rival or not. A good is excludable when people can be prevented from consuming it, often by threat of the law. A good is rival when my consumption makes it impossible for you to consume it. We both can't eat the same apple. Private goods are both excludable and rival. Public goods, on the other hand, are neither. For example, national defense, public parks, street lighting, lighthouses. If government does not provide public goods, their supply might be suboptimally low, if they are supplied at all. There are also goods that are non-rival but excludable. Those are called club goods, like for example Netflix. It is inefficient that they are excludable. The most efficient allocation would be achieved if Netflix were free. No other consumer is harmed if another person watches a show. The final type of goods are commons. They are rival but not excludable. For example, fisheries, forests, or groundwater basins. Because they are rival, they require special rules for use. Otherwise, they are overused and in the worst case, they may run out. This is called the tragedy of the commons. Public goods like roads can flip into the commons category, for example during rush hour, when too many people use the road, and they do become rivals for its use, but cannot be excluded. Some market failures definitely pose serious problems for welfare and the economy. The question is whether thinking of them as market failures is useful or not. In a narrow view, you could say that the market is about exchange. In the case of pollution or common goods, nothing is exchanged, so it's not so much a failure of the market as that the market simply does not apply. The language of failure presupposes that the market should apply in principle to all these problems. This gives the market primacy when it comes to finding solutions, which is problematic. The market is a mechanism to achieve certain goals, not an end in itself. Whether you choose to give the market a primary role is a political decision, and not one that somehow logically follows from economic theory. Thanks for watching.